And I really want to give you all some ways to walk through some activities and exercises to help you pinpoint what's really going on and what's blocking your path to better communication, what's making you feel stressed or unstable in these relationships, and what's just really making it hard to have the kind of experience in your home that you really want to have. There we go. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our live class today on communicating when it's also really, really hard and it feels impossible. Has that happened to anybody? Just me, maybe? No, I'm sure it's a lot of you, or else you probably would not be here today sharing with me. And welcome, everybody. Welcome, Titus and Leslie. And if I mispronounced your names, forgive me. Anne and SG and Sunny, Kathy, Kira. So I don't want to make this a lecture, and I really want to give you all some ways to walk through some activities and exercises to help you pinpoint what's really going on and what's blocking your path to better communication, what's making you feel stressed or unstable in these relationships, and what's just really making it hard to have the kind of experience in your home that you really want to have. So if that sounds good, again, pop your questions. Wait, where is the chat? Do you guys see the chat? Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, so any questions that you might have, let's pop them in the chat. I'm going to move my screens around here so I can. Okay, so we know that conscious communication it has this focus on empathy, it has a focus on nurturing, connection, but all of that is really, really impossible when our nervous system is saying, alert, 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 something's wrong, you need to fix it, you're going to lose control of the situation. Like, our brain is sometimes getting these messages that conflict with the principles that we've really committed to, like empathy, respect, understanding. And I also think that sometimes we mix up respect, like we expect respect from our children. And then sometimes what's coming out of our mouths or what's showing on our faces is anything but respectful. And that doesn't mean that we don't get a pass, that we don't get to sometimes feel angry and mess up. Absolutely, just like our kids. But also just recognize if that is an ongoing pattern. And we'll talk about some ways to do that as well. But we really want to look at what is the emotional climate of my home. So we want to just right now think about, we know that the importance is placed on maintaining the supportive relationship, right? And nurturing our children, nurturing their emotional development. But let's put that aside for right now. And I just want to ask you to write down 5 words to describe what it is like in your home. The emotional weather. What is that like? Is it stormy? Is it angry? And you can use any words that you want. They don't have to be weather words, but just think of 5 words to describe what it's like, the emotional climate is like in your home. Did I hear someone ask a question? Okay, awesome. I thought I heard some background noise, but it might have just been someone unmuting for a second. So if you're just joining us, I want you to write down 5 words to describe what it's like in your home right now, the emotional climate of your home. All right, I'm going to give you 30 more seconds to do that. And then if you've already finished, would you share? And if you don't want to share publicly on the chat, you can send it directly to me too, and I can just read it aloud without anybody having to see it. So we have frustrating, stormy, repetitive, disrespectful, backtalk. Hostile, cold, uncaring, unconnected. Wow, these are really big, heavy emotions and feelings and words to describe your environment right now. And when we're in this kind of a pattern, do you feel like you have the resources to be able to move forward? I mean, how many people really feel like they can continue on when it feels hostile and cold and uncaring and disconnected. Somebody saying, I do not have children. I'm a holistic nurse with children and parents who come to me for stress management. Yes, I love that. Well, I hope that you're finding strategies and that maybe some of these exercises, if you're just joining us, I was saying, I don't want this to be a lecture class. I really want to walk you guys through some activities and exercises to help you identify what's blocking good communication in your home, right? So it's not just, oh, you say this is what's going on, and then we go, oh, we'll try this. And then you go home and try it. And then maybe it quote unquote works. I hate that word work, but works, meaning you get through the situation with less conflict, but then it crops up again and you feel like you're back at square one. I want to have you be able to reach in and really access the resources that you have. Kathy's saying, I have the resources, but I'm being blocked by my partner. So sometimes that might feel like you're between two, like a rock and a hard place, right? Like you have what you need, you know what you need to do, but someone else is there that you're in conflict with, and it makes it hard to then express yourself maybe fully or honestly, or that other person might overpower you and then you really don't feel like you have a voice. There's so many things that could be underlying that. Thank you for sharing. Kim is saying sunny, energy, peaceful. Kim, you're going to share some of those resources then, I hope, today, and help us plug back in. And I know that this is the course that you're on, this is the direction that you're on, but being part of an environment that is collaborative, that is peaceful, that is sunny even, is a goal for so many of us. Now, again, conscious, not perfect, you guys. It doesn't mean, I'm sure that our homes are not always sunny, energetic, and peaceful, right? Sometimes there's going to be that conflict and stress. But in this little check-in, we want to see, what is the overall environment like? And if your environment is feeling heavy or too stressful to even make good decisions in, then we're going to talk about all of that. But know that that is going to inhibit your ability to be conscious with your kids. We're going to fall back on things that we don't like to rely on, like control, punishment. And speaking of control, we talked about respect at the beginning, and I said that sometimes we think about respect, but it's one way, it's one-sided, and we expect that respect from our kids, but we don't realize that what we're saying, how we're saying it, or how our body language is communicating our boundaries is actually sending our kids the message that we don't actually value what they have to say, or we don't value their feelings. And that doesn't mean that we don't, or that we have that actual intention, but it means that something is getting in the way. So let's talk about more about what that might be. So we took the temperature in our home. We know where our baseline is. So the goal today is not only to just improve and enhance the communication that you have with your kids, but also, again, identify and then overcome, remove those obstacles. So if you've been with me for a while, or if you're new, let's just review. We have the pillars of focus that I use for conscious communication is support, stress, and skills. So that supportive relationships, stress regulation, and then we can move to skills development. But we have to have those first two pieces in place in order to be able to work on skills, right? Our nervous systems have to feel somewhat calm enough to move through a situation. And we do have to feel like we're supported, like we have good relationships. Maybe in the moment, sometimes our relationship is not going down the best path, but that doesn't mean that the core of it is fractured. If the core of your relationship is fractured and has been distant or non-communicative or adversarial or aggressive for a long time, then that means that we have to dig in and do some of that repair work first, right? If our relationship is on track, but we are really not well practiced in regulating our own emotions, we're never really going to be able to move to that skills piece. But here's the other thing. I want you to think about these support, stress, and skills, not just about your kids. It's not just about supporting your kids. It's not just about stress. It's not just about co-regulating the stress for your children. And it's not just about building your children's skills. It's about building our skills. It's about, do we feel supported? So how many of you feel supported in your relationships? We have Kathy saying, what if the other person doesn't want to do the repair work? So that would indicate that, no, I don't feel supported in this relationship, possibly, right? So that's an obstacle. Now, what do we do if that other person doesn't want to do that repair work? I can't answer that question for you on a call like this, because there are so many factors at play. There's so many variables that really influence that. But what we can do to try to bridge that gap is to show that sometimes that other person needs outside counseling, they need their own support, they need to talk to a therapist, they have other issues that they're like, we all have our own issues. So sometimes it's not that we can't necessarily repair until that person is ready, but we can show someone that this is what we want, that we want this collaborative approach. And really what we do is, by identifying the points that we do agree on, identifying the goals we do have that are united. And if there's still friction, if there's still, I disagree with the way that you're doing this, that's probably a longer family discussion, a family therapy discussion. That's not something that can just be easily resolved. But when you come from that conscious communication point of view, it says, I hear that you're worried that our children are XYZ, going to run the house, going to disobey, going to do, whatever that other person is afraid of, helping them to feel like you understand them and that you're not just trying to change them, is the core work of what we do, not only with our kids, but with other people in our relationships. Again, it's a longer, conversation. But so if we don't feel supported, if we can't regulate our stress, or we're dealing with too much stress, and I sent everyone a stress inventory checklist, which I will, you probably got in your email after you signed up, joins the class, if you joined right at the top of the hour. But we'll review it in this class today, and then you can have it to fill out. When you fill out that stress inventory checklist, if you're finding that your stress is too much, if you check off too many of those boxes, you're not going to be able to help your kids, right? And then again, if your skills aren't there, now skills, stress regulation is one of the biggest skills, right? So say we don't have the skills, stress regulation, say we're not very good at understanding someone else's emotions yet. Maybe we're not very good at communicating our own needs. These are all skills that we have to build if we don't want our kids to either run the show, like we say, run the house, or run over us, and we're not able then to set boundaries. Because I don't want anybody to think that conscious parenting or conscious communication is about saying, oh, I know you're sad, and oh, look, but you also stole this from the store, or oh, look, you also, hit your sister, and I know you're sad. And then we just leave it at that. Like, no, it is never, never, never about that. It's never about making connection the only thing that we talk about. Connection is just the foundation that says to your kids, you're safe. I'm not going to really be mean to you. Our kids fear that we're going to be mean to them somehow. And then they walk away resenting our advice and our opinion and our support, instead of actually leaning into it and feeling nurtured by it. So if you do not, so support, stress, and skills does not just apply to our kids, it applies to us. And that's kind of what I want to look at today when we go through some of these other exercises. So you looked at the climate of your home. The next thing we want to do is, if you could describe your relationship with your children, or if you have one child that you have a particularly challenging time with, choose that one child to think about. If you could name 5 words to describe the relationship that you have with your children, how would you describe that relationship? And if you've done this exercise before, because maybe you're in one of the classes and we've talked about this exercise, know that it changes. Like the relationship that I had with my daughter and the way I would describe it when she was 5 is so very different than the relationship that I have with her now at 18. Or at 12. or at 9. Like it changed all the time. And it sometimes I felt really secure in our relationship, and other times, like any parent, I was worried that I was doing everything wrong or that we were never going to get through this bumpy period. So again, the idea of gentle parenting is not that we never have stormy times. It's just that we know when those are the overwhelming experience or the overriding experience, and not, just a one-off. We know if that's the everyday, that we know that there's a challenge. So think about the 5 words that you would describe your relationship, if you could do that. And if you want to, if you would share them below, I would love that. I'll give you a minute to do that. Oh, so Kathy says funny, loving, one-sided, challenging, and close. Sometimes can be, it sounds like one-sided. Maybe sometimes it sounds like it's not both people are participating. Maybe sometimes we're doing more. It feels like we're always initiating with our kids. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, but I know that's definitely something that is not uncommon to experience when we're talking about if we had to sum up our relationship with our kids in just 5 words. Anybody else? How would you describe your relationship? And you can send it just to me and I'll read them out. It doesn't have to be if you don't want to share it with everyone. He's only 3. It's more about his needs and wishes than mine. Absolutely. But have you ever noticed how very empathetic a young child can be when they see that we're hurt, or if they see that we are just even in distress, like you bump your knee and then you have that little 3-year-old comes over and kisses your boo-boo. Those are the beginnings of that empathy. So when a kid, and that will grow when that's nurtured. So when we see our child in a moment of distress, and again, within reason, I'm not one of those people that's saying that you have to run over to your child falls and you have to go, oh my God, you fell. You okay? You must be so sad or hurt. Like, no. Like, oh, look, you fell. You need help getting up, and you put out your hand. Right. I'm not saying that we have to be overly emotional with our children, but can we be respectful and recognize without dismissing, minimizing, distracting? Those are some of and making assumptions about how they feel. So I won't necessarily assume that my child got hurt when she was young. I might ask, hey, look, you fell down. And then wait for what because kids watch us for our reactions as well, right? We're learning how to react to situations by modeling and by copying what we see. And the same thing happens with that empathy. Questionable. So we have questionable. So the relationship is questionable. This is good. So go back to these things too. And we're going to we'll talk about like how you can take this information and use it. But questionable, emotional, share. Somebody else said emotional, top down, challenging, push, pull, distanced yet fiery. You guys are coming up with really interesting and great ways to describe things. Top down, push, pull. So we know that what happens when there's a top down relationship or a push pull relationship with kids. What do you guys think the number one thing that kids are resisting in that moment? And it's not the boundary that we're trying to enforce. What do you think they might be resisting? Pop it in the chat, and I'm going to read some more of these. Kathy says, that's exactly what I'm not seeing in either of my sons. I think they're following their father's example. So definitely in a household where if we have one parent that's very dominant or very overpowering or top down or power over, and we have one that's more emotional and nurturing, the emotional and nurturing parent is definitely going to they're going to be that buffer for some of the stress. And kids are going to definitely also model behaviors that they see in parents, both parents. And it can be confusing and conflicting for everybody, but it doesn't mean that they're going to follow in their footsteps. First of all, do you have the 3-year-old? At 3, they have very little ability to regulate on their own. to not be thrown off easily. Sensitive children, even more difficult. There's a longer learning curve because their nervous system is just more sensitive. So it's picking up more information. It's getting assaulted with more sensory input than maybe another child who doesn't have that sensitive system. But definitely, both parents will impact. But if you are the one that's able to maintain a more regulated stance or a more compassionate view, that does matter. It is influential, and it does buffer some of that stress. But I definitely would say if we want long term to have a happier home, then yeah, we might need to look at how can we collaborate with, how can both parents get on. It doesn't have to be the same exact page, but what are the non-negotiables? Like, I want us not to yell at our children, or I want us to not use timeouts specifically, or whatever those non-negotiables might be for you. Try to pinpoint it down to that, because we're never going to necessarily agree on everything, and we don't have to. But if we can really get down to what are my non-negotiables, then it's going to be a lot easier to make changes, because you're not overwhelmed by everything all at once. Amy says, interestingly, this was a harder exercise for me than I thought when you first described it. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that funny how we don't necessarily think about these things? We're so busy. I have a kid graduating right now from high school, and I have never had so many things to do on our to-do list. And the last thing I'm thinking about necessarily are these little checkpoints about our relationship, until sometimes it gets to the point where nobody can stand being around each other. And we don't want it to get to that. If you're already there, that's okay too. We'll pull you back. We're going to close the circle of connection. We're going to build more trust, but we got to start with us. We have to start with how is our support, trust, and skills, the resources that we have. And recognizing that, oh yeah, you know what, our relationships, they're kind of in their fire alarm status, or you know what, our relationships are okay, but my ability to regulate, not so great. So looking at how we would describe that relationship with our kids can start to uncover these obstacles that we overlooked because we're busy and we have so many things to do. And we're trying to get and kindergarten graduation and middle school graduation and end of year parties and summer field days at school. Like, there's so much going on, I know, for everybody. And of course, if you're in a different area of the world, maybe you're not at the end of the school year, maybe you're heading into winter and things are a little bit different, but whatever those transitions you might be going into. So he says, listen, control. So I think these are some of the words that you were using to describe the relationship. Control. Oh, or is that what you were saying for what the kids are missing? Control is a tricky word. I want to change it to autonomy. And if that's what you meant, then yes. So kids aren't looking for control in those situations. They're looking for some autonomy. We tell them so often what to do, when to do it, how to feel about it sometimes, even when we shouldn't. Like, don't be sad. There's no reason to cry. You don't have to overreact. It's okay. Like, we do so much of that distracting that it's not that they're seeking to control a situation, but when we're in that really, head-butting phase, they're seeking autonomy. And not just free will to do anything that they want, but the ability to direct our lives is just a basic need. And if kids feel that that's been taken away because of the top-down controlling power over approach that we have, or that attitude, or even that if there's some of that, well, I can't let them get away with it, right? These are some fears and beliefs that might come in. SG says, my control issues, them wanting autonomy. Yeah, our control issues, right? My control issues are the cause of so much conflict. And if I would just let those go, it would be so much easier. I can handle my kids' autonomy issues. But how many of you feel like you have some control issues? Raise your hand if that's something that you struggle with. No, is it just me and SG? Just us? When you feel that urge to control, There's two things that there we go. I got some raised hands. Awesome. It's not just us. It's definitely not. When you feel that urge to come in and whether it's direct the situation, make an adjustment, distract your children, minimize it, whatever your control method is, because sometimes they're very subtle, right? It's not that we always come in overpowering. Sometimes we might come in with guilt. And what does guilt sound like? Why do you always have to be like this? Why do you always have to do this? Can't you see I'm trying to help? Oh, it's like, it's not overtly mean or rude but it's sending our kids a message that is not necessarily what we want them to hold when they're trying to make decisions. Amy's saying, I did more when mine were little, but I'm learning to be less controlling and more understanding. Awesome. Leslie saying, in the past, I've done a lot of work in this area. Yay, me too. It definitely still comes up for me. And it's linked to my nervous system saying, alarm, fire alarm. There's something, danger, danger. My nervous system is 100% in control of my control issues. And so when I'm able to reduce the sensations of panic that I have, then I'm able to then come in more consciously. But that's a work in progress. So if you are, is anybody feeling that rush of panic when something is happening with their children that they can't handle? Or maybe it's not even panic. Maybe it's either panic or hopelessness, right? So panic can make us act out, and hopelessness can make us avoid the conflict. And if we are avoiding conflict with our kids, ooh, what's happening? For me, that would increase my anxiety, because now I'm actively avoiding a situation which I know I need to deal with. But if I'm worried about maybe how my child will react, why am I worried about that? Because I know it's going to stress me out. I know I'm going to then, has anybody ever avoided opening a piece of mail or opening an email or answering a phone call because they don't have the bandwidth to manage what will happen? It's the same thing with our kids. We're going to avoid things that we don't feel like we can handle. So that moves us back to, where are our supportive relationships? The importance of connection, not just connection between me and my child, but connection with other adults. And I know some of you mentioned that you're struggling with partnerships. So your partner, their other parent, isn't necessarily on board with what you're trying to do. That's going to leave you feeling less supported. What do you all do when you feel less supported? What do you guys do? It really is a terrible need to control, probably stemming from some anxiety about something else, behavior, unsure about something else. Yes, that's exactly what I had just said, right? Totally on board with you right there. It was the way I was brought up. Do as I say. Ways that differ too much stress me out. Oh, do as I say, not as I do. Most of us, if you're under a certain age, I have now met some younger parents who were raised in this way, which is so crazy to me, and also kind of awesome. Parents that I was talking to 15 years ago that had 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, some of them are actually young parents, or not even people that I have taught, but just in general, that age group, if they are having children and they're between 25 and 35, they may have been children when we were, not that long ago, when conscious parenting was really, and communication was really starting to become out in the mainstream. I don't think it's still mainstream, but it's definitely has such a much bigger presence than it did when I first started my website, for example. And there were exactly 7 people Googling the word conscious parenting, you guys. That's how little that word was in our vernacular, was out in the public. In 2007, there were 7 people Googling that word. That's how many people. And now I bet that keyword is skyrocketed. because of many, many people that have brought this to the public. But that's kind of exciting. But also, it's not necessarily just the mainstream, and the way that we grew up is still the way a lot of our peers grew up. How many of you have peers or siblings that are still responding in this way? I do. Most of my family does not parent this way, honestly. Now, I shouldn't say most, but a good majority of the people do not necessarily follow. It interests them, but it takes a lot of work because, excuse me, our conditioning, the way that we have been parented, it's so very strong in us, and it really does impact how we are able to present to our children, which is why when we are struggling, the resources that we have, let's see what you guys put up. I'm better about worry, but avoid more than I used to. Ouch. Oh, right. And it shifts, right? As our children grow and change, and their needs change, their attitudes change too, right? Their communication can change. And avoiding is something that I also realized that I would fall into because it was just easier to not have to deal with something. And that definitely, right? We want to just kind of be aware of those things. Am I avoiding something? Because then we resent it. Then later, when we haven't dealt with it and it still hasn't changed, then we start to get resentful. It's like, oh, I talked about this once. Why? And we start making up all of these stories and assuming, right? We do the assumptions about why our kids are not meeting our expectations. Self-empathy, Leslie, I'm thinking you're saying self-empathy is one of those tools maybe that you use to bring yourself down. Let's talk about that really quickly. How many, I had a self-empathy chart right up on our screen. So let's talk about that right now. I'm going to talk about the 5 steps to self-empathy. And if you have not practiced self-empathy, or if you know the idea is to show yourself compassion for your feelings, but you don't really know what that looks like, let's just it's 5. We can do it in 5 steps to connect with whether it's unmet needs, feelings, fears, whatever it is that might be driving your unconscious and automatic reactions, right? So to align with that authentic self, that self that feels like I can be honest, I can share without without vomiting my anger on someone, right? So I'm allowed to, or I'm able to share and also do that mindfully. So self-empathy, step 1, reflect. Just take 1 moment, maybe 5 moments, just take a minute to breathe. Try and be still, silent with your feelings. Start to notice what's going on without making any judgments, without trying to talk yourself out of it, without using logic on yourself, without trying to dismiss your emotions. The same things that we do with our children. Don't minimize it. Don't dismiss it. Don't try to distract yourself and think about something else. Just reflect and breathe. This is the hardest thing because we don't want to sit in that feeling of discomfort. Does anybody want to sit in that feeling of discomfort? Probably not. And that discomfort is exactly what it's not going anywhere. We need to feel it to move through it. Because if we stuff it down, then it's just going to pop out later, right? That's when the resentment builds. So just take a moment to breathe, be silent with your feelings. Do that for as long as you can. Then when you feel a little more calm, especially if you were having a physical reaction, like your heart was beating really fast or your face got really flushed, whatever is going on there, let that happen so that you regulate with the breath. And then ask yourself, what just happened? But don't come up with this long dialogue about what you think happened. Just repeat it to yourself with what you observed directly. What could you see and hear? So describe what happened and what caused you to move into the state of regulation, or just let your feelings flow uncensored. So if you felt whatever those feelings are, or whatever the words even that come up, don't worry about being non-judgmental at this point. Just let whatever feelings flow. And then what's going to happen is what was revealed to you in that moment? Like, what was missing for you? Reveal any needs. So let your feelings and needs, like, I just need peace. I just need some order in this house. It's a mess. I just need to feel respected, or I need to feel heard. let those things come up and reveal themselves to you. It is hard to sit with distress. 100% agree with Amy. It's hard to sit with the distress, but I read somewhere that that distress intolerance is the way to grow. We're building stress tolerance, or distress tolerance. Absolutely. The more that we're able to flow through those feelings, just like what we want to do with our kids, we want to help them feel their feelings. Then they come out on the other end and they go, oh, I made it through that. And I did it with your help. You stood by me. Like, are we going to sometimes get upset and have moments where it's not comfortable and where standing with our kids means that we're walking away and getting a moment to regulate ourselves and then coming back? Yeah, it's not always going to look perfect. And self-empathy, I'm saying these, I'm taking a long time to describe them a little. Do this when you have time, or you can also move through these fairly quickly. It doesn't have to be, you have to sit for 5 minutes to show yourself empathy first. But this, if you do this as a practice, even every day, like right now, think about an interaction that you had with someone that you love. It doesn't even have to be your child. And just take a moment to reflect on that moment. Just breathe, be silent put yourself back in that place. Be silent with your feelings. And then think about what happened. What did I observe? What made me dysregulated? What was I feeling and needing in this moment? And then as those things start to pop up, allow those sensations and those feelings. Just allow them without judgment. So maybe it came up like, oh, my kid is such an XYZ, and okay, let that reveal. It's revealing, right? And then you're revealing, oh, it's because I needed XYZ. Then that's going to cause some of that distress in your body, possibly. Maybe your body goes numb and you feel nothing. That's also a possibility. But move your attention to your body and focus on the sensations that you feel in your body. Does your body get tight? Does it start to tremble? Is there pain involved? And when we can allow our attention to stay with these uncomfortable sensations and then allow them to pass, like we're not going to do anything. We're just going to feel it and wait for it to pass. And when that happens, when then we're starting, this is about regulating yourself. Then we can identify, okay, I identified these needs. Now, what can I do next? Right? A new vision. What is that need possibly linked to? What is that emotional reaction that I had linked to? Well, you know what? I haven't really felt heard by anybody in a month, in 2 months, this whole school year. Or I don't really have, my best friend moved away 3,000 miles away, and I don't have the same everyday connection that I had. And I'm sad about that. And now I'm trying to control everybody on the outside because I'm sad. So yes, Laurel, I will send actually, let me pull them up on the screen for you right now. I'm sorry. I'll do that. And I can send them to you. If you're in our conscious communication class or our peaceful solutions class, it's in your workbooks, but let me put it on the screen right now so you guys can see it. What should we do if the breathing exercises heightens anxious feelings? Okay, yes, I'm sorry. I always say this at the beginning of the class. I didn't say this. Sometimes breathing exercises or sitting with feelings will cause challenges for somebody, especially if you've had PTSD or you've had trauma. So this is not something everybody take. Of course, these exercises, adapt them, or not even adapt, but just know your personal boundaries and your own limits. And if they do cause you distress, then I would advise speaking to someone. I mean, this is something that you might need to speak to a therapist about, right? Not an educator, because when feelings of distress like that are elicited from breathing, then it means that you've definitely got some other challenges that not necessarily an educational perspective can do. But when you're doing this, when you're showing yourself self-empathy, breathing, just try to normalize your breathing, right? This isn't deep breathing for meditation right here, because that's sometimes what can also, if you try to do a meditation or someone tries to walk you through a guided meditation or a guided exercise, that can sometimes cause you distress. So this is not a meditation. This is definitely just walking yourself through the process of identifying what happened and then bringing it down into your body so that you can feel those sensations. And if that causes you too much distress, then I'm going to say definitely seek out somebody that can support you directly in that, because you don't want to do these things alone. You kind of want to buddy up with someone that can guide you through safe practices that are safe for your nervous system. I'm not a mental health professional, so I don't want to give you that kind of information. But if breathing exercises, and again, breathe to feel your feelings, but if it heightens those anxious feelings, then definitely pause. Don't go any further. Journaling might be an alternative activity. So just some free writing, just write down whatever thoughts come to you. Taking it down onto pen and paper and then reviewing it later, or just writing it to get it out, can be as beneficial. Sometimes just movement and exercise, like going for a run. Like maybe you're not going to, well, I don't know if you can run and process feelings necessarily, but those are all, physical activities are going to help reduce stress. So if it feels uncomfortable to connect with your feelings through breathing and slowing down, then do something active. Do any kind of sensory or movement activity that helps regulate you and can put you in a place of safety and not where your nervous system is feeling too much. She says, I had no model of reacting calmly. And then where the end result was good and positive, everything was chaotic, and you listened and did as the loudest parent would say, and all would be okay. Yeah. So that pattern can it's like stress relief, right? So there's that, okay, it's stressful, but then everything comes back and there's positive, or everybody's then, when everybody obeys, or, the demands are met, then everybody's then treated with positivity and caring and engagement. And that just sends a message that is unreliable to our kids. So that's why it's those kinds of patterns. One, they can be obstacles to good communication, but also are really important to break so that we don't send our kids the message that we're not safe and reliable, that things are, when you behave this way, or you're only wanted or approved of when you behave this way, or when you do what I want, or when I'm feeling calm, then I approve of your behavior. If I'm not feeling calm, then you're the problem. And then that sends a message to our kids that is really hard for them to overcome and also navigate their own stress response, right? Because if they're worried about having to manage our stress response by not setting us off, then they can't really take a lot of care for theirs. Now, again, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like little kids, they can't do it without us. Sometimes they can. Sometimes they can regulate. I've watched my own 3-year-old regulate another 3-year-old. I tell the story all the time, so I won't repeat it here. But that's happened where I've watched a young child regulate another child. But we just don't want that to be the expectation. We don't want to rely on older children to be the model, or our kids to be more regulated than we can be. How many times have we expected our kids to be more regulated than we are? I've definitely experienced that. All right, I'm going to stop this share really quick because I know we're getting to the top of our hour. So I want to move through a couple more exercises for you to take with you, and then we'll wrap it up and share. But when we're talking about building supportive relationships, we really need to put in place some resources for our own connection. So if you could write down 3 resources for you, if you don't have a supportive partner, then that's not going to be a resource for you right now. Maybe you want it to be, but if it's not right now, don't write it down. So write down, is there someone that you text regularly or can make a phone call to? Is there an online group that you connect with where you can share what's happening to you? You can share your needs and feelings and have validation and get support, not from your children who don't necessarily have the capacity, nor should it be their responsibility. But that doesn't mean that you don't deserve it. That doesn't mean that you should try to go in and navigate a situation with your children if you're not feeling up to it. So write down 3 resources, whether it's a person, an online resource. Maybe it's just, journaling does really work for me. And my resource when I'm feeling dysregulated and unsupported is to go and journal about it. Now, I do recommend, isolation can cause stress. So if you're isolated as a parent and you're having trouble coming up with these 3 resources, this is where we want to begin. And I know that you don't have them now, but that doesn't mean that we can't help you find them, that we can't help get you connected to someone or something that makes you feel supported. Maybe it's a local in-person group. Maybe it's just going out with another parent friend for an hour once a week or twice a month if we can't do it. That might be all you need to start feeling more supported. But taking that first step might be hard if you feel completely isolated. And I know that there are parents who are, whether you're in the military or whether you've moved away or whether you just don't have family available or have family, that can be an obstacle to being able to communicate with our kids. That's an eye opener. I feel bad when I do expect them to be more well regulated. And you're not alone. You're not the only one who has unconsciously expected that of their children. But it is an eye opener, right? It's so important for us to just recognize when we're expecting more of our children than they're actually able to give or that we're even able to manage in that moment. How many people are having trouble coming up with resources? Is anybody having difficulty figuring out what those supportive resources are? All right, I want to talk about the next pillar, which is stress regulation, right? So stress regulation, we have to be, as my friend Amy Bryant put it, regulated enough to interact in a situation. That doesn't mean that we need to feel calm and light and fluffy and perfect all the time. Not perfect at all. But that's not the goal. The goal is, can I maintain my ability to see clearly? Can I think straight? Can I look beyond what's happening to be able to empathize with my child? That's regulated enough. If we can get there, if you can't get there, what is our practice? What is our practice of getting back in alignment with our nervous system? Or what is it, our practice for reducing that stress and calming our nervous system enough so that we can handle? Now, you might say, okay, I have tools, but they're not working. I have these tools. I breathe. I walk outside. I look at something that I look at a picture of someone that I love, or I put my feet in the ground, or I go for a run. I do all these things, but I'm still stressed. And this is where our stress inventory checklist comes in. So I'm going to pull it up on the screen for you guys, but I also sent it in email. So look for it in email. If you didn't receive it, just email me and I will make sure that you get it. So print this out and think about it. Now, this is just divided into, I think, 6 categories: emotional stress, physical stress, environmental stress, relational stress, time management stress, and then just parenting specific stress, things about our kids that we might stress about. So what I want you to do with this checklist, and it has the instructions right on there. So if you're listening to the recording and you've downloaded it, or if you're just joining us, we want to go through this checklist and then just check all of the situations that apply to your current experience. What we're going to do is try to identify the sources of stress that are impeding your ability to practice stress regulation, to be more mindful. Because if there are, for example, because I know that we're running out of time, if you were to score 18 or more on this checklist, if you check off and if you give yourself 1 point for everything, I was going to read it out on this, but we're kind of getting out of time and I don't want to rush through it, but go through each one, give yourself 1 point for every statement that you check. If you check 18 or more, you are in a period where you have to focus on that first. We have to figure out, what can I take off my plate? How can I reduce what's happening? Now, sometimes it might be all emotional stress. So there's obviously different strategies that we're going to work on to deal with emotional stress, rather than if you are having physical stress, like if you're physically exhausted, if you're having pain or muscle tension or changes in your appetite or any, trouble sleeping, all of those challenges. Again, there might be deeper root sources, but we want to figure out, where is the overwhelming stress coming from? So the stress inventory checklist is going to help you figure out what's really getting in the way. What's really happening in our home that's making it difficult. You guys see the stress checklist right on my screen right now? There it is. So then after you complete the checklist, just take a moment and look at everything that you've checked. What is causing you the most stress, right? Are there common themes or patterns that are popping up? Like maybe you're noticing, like I said, it's all emotional stress. It's my own anxiety. It's my own worries that are getting in the way. Maybe you notice that there's environmental stress. My house is chaotic. There's too much going on all the time. These are challenges that we can work with, which will then ease the communication between our kids because we don't have this outside stress, these outside stressors impeding that relational connection. Now, is it going to solve every little challenge? No, we're going to one by one start to root out all of the obstacles. So look at the checklist and then maybe do this with a partner or a friend so that you can then maybe chat about, well, this is what's really stressing me out. And maybe your friend has some ideas about, they know you so well, they're going to say, you know what if you cut out, or what if you cut back on doing carpool 3 times a week? Maybe you find someone to step in for you and tell me you only do it twice a week so that you have that extra time for yourself. Or maybe, you're going to have somebody that you can bounce ideas off of. Even if they don't come up with solutions, they can be a sounding board for you. So you can discuss how these individual stressors are impacting your family and your communication, and also what can I put in place this week? Now, if you have 18 or more that you've checked off, just pick one area. Pick one area to work on. So maybe you want to work on environmental stress. Maybe my household is just too noisy, too chaotic. It's too disorganized. I'm going to work on that. So what can we do? We can have a family meeting. If our kids are old enough, if they're little, 3, 4, 5, it's going to be about modeling and sharing that. You know what? My brain, it gets so fuzzy when there's so much noise around, or when there's so much stuff on the floor. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make every Wednesday night or every night at 7 p.m. It's going to be cleanup time, right? So if you have little kids, you can make it fun. You can figure out how to prioritize whatever environmental stress is getting in your way, and then make it fun. Share your needs with your kids. Let them know how it affects you. Like I said, my head gets all fuzzy and I can't think. Whatever it is, now I'm sharing that for a little kid, an example with a little kid. But with an older kid, you can say, you know what? I'm not really able to work when we have so many things all over the dining room table. Maybe we ask an older child, would you be willing to help me keep this area organized? It's starting to become really challenging. Is that something you can help me do? Like, we can go, instead of, why are you leaving your stuff all over the floor? I just cleaned up this area. Can't you see? And we kind of go into that because we're feeling stressed and we feel like nobody else is helping us clean up and we're the only ones doing it. So figure out what these stressors are for you. Talk with someone about the ones that are most impacting you, and then come up with 1 or 2 ideas for reducing that one particular stress that's the overriding stressor in your home that you've noticed. I'm going to stop the share again for a second. Does that make sense to everyone? It looks like here's some of the resources someone shared: prayer, exercise, and a trusting friend who knows me and my relationship with my family members. The trusting friend is the best, you guys. That ability to just call or chat with someone who's not going to even give you advice necessarily. They know your family, they know the dynamics, and you can just share your experience with them and get some validation. I don't know if everybody recognizes the power of that, the power in that, for you then to be able to walk away and see with new eyes the situation. Like, I have been in an absolute ragey mindset sometimes with maybe something that has just happened with my child. And then I go and I get that support and I text that friend that helps me, that will send me a funny meme or that will respond back to me in whatever way that our friendship has, that it's just like that perfect thing that you need. And then I walk away and I'm like, wow, I was really I'm able to see how out of my mind I was. And I'm able to go and look at my child in such a different perspective than I was even just 10 minutes ago before I had that check-in with my friend. Now, sometimes you can make these check-ins regular. So how do we build skills? Our skills. Make these regular practices. So if we recognize certain common stressors that are impacting our interactions with our children, putting in place practices that will build our tolerance, that will build our ability to communicate, that will build our patience. It's all of these things are building on one another, right? So having supportive relationships helps us regulate stress. Helping to regulate our stress and remove some of those stressors that we're having helps us build those skills. Helping us build those skills leads to better communication and better behavior, and better behavior then leads to better relationships, and better relationships then lead to better stress regulation. So we can go around and around, and that's how that works. But we have to have those things too. It's not just about give to your kids. So if you've been on the give to your kids train, and like I'm empathizing with you and still nothing is changing, then look inside. Think about, whoa, I don't have the supportive relationships that I thought I actually had or that I need. Think about if that's true for you. Think about how good you are at being regulated enough to handle what's happening. Because if you're not, don't get down on yourself, but go, oh, this is the key. This is what's actually getting in the way. And then we can start to build self-regulation practices. And it does not have to be breathing exercises. Again, journaling, listening to music, creative art. Art therapy is a thing for a reason. It's soothing. It actually helps us move from one state to another. So think about how you regulate your stress best, and then recognizing those signs of stress in yourself, right? I think you guys know enough about recognizing stress in our kids. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's talking about what to do with our kids. So what do we do to recognize the signs of stress in ourselves? Go through this week and check your triggers. If you get reactive to something and you notice that you're getting triggered and you become reactive, start to jot down when that's happening and notice patterns. Patterns. They will always lead us to more information than if we just kind of ignore and we go through the day just putting out behavior fires or just fighting everything that comes at us to try and just maintain some sense of inner stability, inner control. Oh, it's going to wear us out. You're going to be exhausted by that. Okay. Questions, comments, thoughts. I think I had one little wrap up. If you're still hanging on, thank you. But let me know if you have any questions or comments before we start to wrap up. Oh, I do have, okay. Most of you have the cards, right? You got the invite today because you have the cards. So let me just pull up this one activity. Actually, it's 3 activities that if you have a partner, if you have a friend, here's some activities you can practice with your conscious communication card activities per parents. Can you all see that? Awesome. So these are just a couple of activities. I can send this to you too. This is actually something that we send out for teachers and groups. Actually, this is not the total. Is this the right one? Yeah, it's the right one. We send it out for teachers. This one says parents, but for teachers and parents to groups when they're using the cards. But if you have the cards and you have a friend or you have a parent group that you're part of that you guys meet, these are some activities that you can do to practice using the cards and practice that conscious communication to build those skills. I'm so glad. It was very helpful. Awesome. What a great session. Thank you. You're very, very welcome. I'm so glad that you were here. And thank you for participating, everybody. So here are some, like I said, I'll send this to you all so that you can have it. But there's a couple. The perspective shift, just ask yourself or your friend, just think about the challenges that you're having with your kids. Find a card that maybe matches your experience and then role play it. What do you normally say and do to your kids? How do you normally react to each other? Talk that out. You might just be able to do it by talking out the actual situations that you've had. Connect and talk about what actually happens in those situations, and then consider the perspective. How do you see your kids in these moments? Why are you thinking that your children are behaving? So try to dig out some of those root causes, the needs and feelings that are happening for yourself and for your children in those moments. But do it with a partner, and then you can role play with the cards using the positive statements and the negative statements to see which one actually feels like it's going to bring you closer. And then you can redo the scene using the communication cards as a guide. So you can practice what it might feel like. And again, use them as a guide. They have on the top a perspective shift so that even if the language doesn't fit, what can I do here? I can prompt with a question. Oh, maybe that's too stressful. Instead, I'm just going to notice what I see without judgment. Those guidelines are there, those perspective shifts, to give you not just words, but the shift in attitude that you actually need to be able to, that viewpoint shift that you need to be able to connect and communicate with your children. Identifying negative messages is really just looking at the avoid section on the cards with the statements that we want to avoid and trying to pick out the blame, the shame, the judgment, and the guilt out of each one. Like, oh yeah, this one, I've said this, and this is, I see the shame. Here are the words. So you can pick out the negative statements and try to find the blame and the shame in that, and see what statements you might even be saying that you didn't realize were blaming or shaming or guilting. And then one last activity that's on here, you can choose a partner. You each stand, 5-10 feet apart, and then one person reads the statements on the card. And when they're reading, and then the other person, when they feel validated or like it's a connecting statement, or they feel warm and like they want to make a connection with that other person, they move closer towards that person. And if that person reading the cards reads a statement that feels invalidating or feels disconnecting or feels negative to that person, they move apart. And so we just get that practice in feeling what it feels like to actually have those words said to us. Does this invite connection, or is this a statement then, oh yes, I've said this and I can see how it would want to make my child pull away? And that's how we can start to build some skills. Again, I sent you the stress inventory checklist, but I will send you some of the other ones so that you can have them. Let's see for questions. And you're very welcome. If you have to jump off, I will of course send you the recording. So what would be a good MAP role model book for 6 to 12-year-olds, prepubescent, more before hormones kick in? So I'm not sure what you mean by a good MAP or role model book. Let's see, I'm trying to think of even books in general for, here's a great book. So this is not what you're actually asking, but a really great book. And this might actually work a little bit better maybe for kids who are more communicative and writing, who like to write back and forth. Like maybe they don't want to actually connect with you verbally because that feels stressful, or eye contact feels stressful. We had a book that was called it was a journal book called Just Between You and Me, or Just Between Me and You. Can't remember. And it had starter prompts, but also blank pages. And the parent fills out, or the caregiver fills out one, and then they pass it to the child and they answer whatever the prompt was, or it might be the same prompt, or it might be a question kind of thing. And then they pass that book back and forth. Really builds connection, and you get to share values without being directly lesson focused. Like, let me give you a lesson on, here's the advice on this, and here's your lesson on XYZ. It's a little more informal and less, well, if you have a kid that has any kind of PDA where they avoid any kind of demand for connection or for talking or any of that, it can be a really great way to bridge that connection. Okay, so a book for balanced relationships and modes of behavior. So I don't know if I have good suggestions for you, but I can tell you some of my favorite books for emotional intelligence in kids. I don't know what you mean by modes of behavior. I'm sorry. Some of my favorite people or authors are John Gottman, so Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child. I love Ross Green, Collaborative and Proactive Solutions. So if you have a kid that has really, really challenging behaviors, that's a great book. He gives then they have a wonderful learning community as well, but specific plans for more challenging, severe behaviors, if that helps. I know, I'm sorry, I might not be understanding it totally clearly either. It might not be you, it might be me for sure. But for understanding development, I think Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child is a great one for that too. But anything by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson, they really give great books for understanding a child's development. There are so many wonderful books out there. I'm really just naming a couple off the top of my head. But if anybody else has any ideas of books for helping kids with balanced relationships, pop them in the chat for sure. Okay, any final questions? Anybody else? All right, you all. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you're walking away with some strategies and some things to look at and think about. And then we can start to make some changes. Again, I'll send you all of the PDFs and the recording, and feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, or thoughts that you have in the meantime. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Please remember, it is about being conscious, not perfect. Okay, everybody, you're very welcome. I'm so glad, Amanda. So many great nuggets. She said, awesome, awesome. Go slow, be conscious, not perfect. I really, really appreciate all of you too as well, Sunny. Thank you. Thanks for being here, everybody. All right, I'll see y'all soon. Take care.